interesting watching them talk, because especially if they had been hurt at some point in their life, they would literally, I could see them transform right before my eyes. I saw one woman once who talked to me about a very traumatic experience she had. Her mother put her in a grocery cart, and it was on a hill, and she rolled down the hill in the bloody grocery cart, and it spilled her out, and she ended up in the hospital and under the care of a pretty damn psychopathic nurse. And it really tilted her towards paranoia for the rest of her life, right? She was so shocked, first of all, that she got hurt, and second of all, that when she went for help, she encountered someone malevolent who actually, what would you say, fed on her pain. She never recovered from that. And then when she was telling me the story, she was like a 55-year-old woman. She was 5. Like everything about her just shifted, like her tone of voice, the set of her face, the voice she used. You could just see that part of her had come to one crash and halt in the out-of-control shopping cart that hit the pavement hard when she was 5 years old. And this hate. There's this idea in the New Testament. It's a very tricky idea. There's one unforgivable sin. People have argued forever about what that is. Because the idea that one of the ideas our culture is based on is that if you've made mistakes in your life, but you admit to them, so that's to confess, let's say, and then you repent, which is to figure out what the hell you did wrong and decide to do better in the future. That can be very hard if you did something really wrong, so it's not like it's an easy thing to do. It's difficult in proportion to the magnitude of your failure to aim, let's say. But that if you do that properly, no matter how far you've strayed, that you can be set back on the proper path, right? That you can be forgiven and that you can then move ahead. And we better hope that's true, because there isn't anybody anywhere who hasn't done many things that were pretty damn dark. And if it was all only the case that we were done when we made a mistake, then, you know, the jig's up for the rest, for everyone. And so you need justice, because you can't get away with everything or even anything, perhaps, but you need mercy too. And mercy is, well, the same. You apply that to your children as well. You know, they make a mistake or multiple mistakes, and perhaps even more so when they're teenagers. And the basic rule is still, you know, try to do better and you're still welcome, fundamentally. And that's a good rule. That's a really good rule. What would interfere with that process of redemption, let's say, and maybe that's your decision not to abide by the dictates of your own conscience. So you tell yourself, I shouldn't be doing this, whatever it happens to be. Maybe you don't find your job meaningful. And not that that's a simple problem. Or maybe you're really called upon to do things at work or in your family life, or just to save your good name that really do disturb you, and yet you do them anyway. And then you practice doing that. You make that into a habit, and everything you practice, that becomes you. This is true neurologically. If you repeat something over and over, if you practice it, you build the biological structures that make you an expert at that. And so if you're practicing violating your own conscience with a performative contradiction, this other form of lie, this willingness to act out things that run contrary to your own sense of morality, right? So you act out a lie. Well, then you become the embodiment of a lie. And, well, there's endless metaphorical speculation about the spirit of the lie, right? I mean, that's one of the characterizations of the great adversary of mankind, you know, is the prince of lies. And you allow that to take up its residence within you because you're rationalizing doing what you hate, then you do that at your own peril. And if you get really good at that, maybe there's no way back. The danger of being an actor, you know, is that you become the actor and then you lose you, obviously. replace you with that falsehood, and that will make you bitter, to lose you in the service of a falsehood. And then, once you're bitter, then you're vengeful. And once you're vengeful, then you're, what's next? Fratricidal. That's Cain, by the way. And once you're fratricidal, the next step is homicidal. And the step past that is genocidal. And, you can walk down all those steps, and people have lots of times. And every one of us has something in us of all of that. That's for sure. And you don't want to practice that unless that's what you want. And so, if you're bitter enough, you might be willing to burn in hell as long as you could watch everyone that you detest roast along with you. But I wouldn't recommend that. That's what you do if you're the dictator in a tyranny. It's like your success is the brightest burning devil in the whole hellish landscape. And that's not a very wise definition of success. Do not do what you hate. Why else? Well, if you do what you hate, you can't admit it to yourself, and you can't say what you've done. And one of the things I've learned as a consequence of being in trying circumstances, whether those are in relationship to serious illness or mob-like behavior or betrayal. So those are the three broad categories of catastrophe. You could add subjugation to tyranny to that, is that when you're in a very, very, very complex situation, which you 100% will be at some point in your life, all you have, if you have anything, and maybe you don't, is the truth. The truth is the only thing that has enough power to guide you when things are impossible. And if you have lived a lie, you will not be able to tell the truth when you need to. And then you'll be done. Or worse, you'll suffer terribly on the way to being done and then be done. And so that's not good. No one who was not hiding things in the fog would think that was good. And you might think, well, why should I have faith in the truth? And the answer is, well, it wouldn't be called faith if there was proof. So that's the first answer. And the second answer is, you want reality itself behind you? Or do you want reality itself opposing you? Because if you employ falsehood, you definitely don't have reality on your side. That's the definition of falsehood. And maybe you think, well, it's just a lie, which is twisting the fabric of reality itself, and I can get away with it, because obviously that's what you think if you practice to deceive. And then you think, well, what are you thinking when you think that? And what you're thinking is, I am canny enough to twist the fabric of reality in my favor at the cost of myself and others, and get away with it. It's like, well, two questions. Who do you think you are? That's the first question. And the second question is, who have you let into your soul? That's the second question. And those are questions well worth asking. You need to act in a manner that allows you to say without concern what you have done. If you're on trial, what's your best defense? Innocence. Obviously. Will that save you? Perhaps not. It depends on how demented the trial has become. But there isn't anything that you have that's better. I know this from experience to some degree. I've been on trial, you might say, by people who have schemed to generate lies about what I'm doing. and what I have done and use them against me. They're often journalists, and generally English journalists, and mostly female English journalists. And all we've done, and by we I mean my family and I, when we've responded to these situations, is release the whole recording. It's like, here's the story, here's what actually happened. No editing. But you can't do that unless the real story is in concordance with the truth. And if it is in accordance with the truth, then you just have to say, this is what happened. And then that works. And that's worth knowing, because you need to know, when the storms come and you have to batten down the hatches, when the enemy's at the gate, what do you have to take you and your family over the steep waves, or to present you with the arms needed to defend yourself against those who will take what you have. And the best answer to that is you have the truth. And a more sophisticated answer, I suppose, is that you have the truth that's made itself manifest in your actions. And then you have the truth that you've managed to incorporate with the words that you've so carefully chosen. And so that's also useful to know too. You build yourself with what you say. You really do. Especially if what you say works. And if you're lying and you get a short-term advantage, you reinforce the spirit of the lie. You nourish it. It's because success produces neural growth. And so beware of how you succeed, because you don't know what's taken root inside you. And that is no joke. I mean, I've seen people who are far down that road. Heaven help them. And sometimes that happens, but it can be a long way back, and it isn't always obvious that you can manage the transformation without dying in the effort. So well, that's pretty good. That's only one rule, but it's a hard rule. And so I think what we'll do, because that's a nice, that's a nice little package. And I'll ask my wife to come back on stage, and she's going to ask me some of the questions that you've submitted. So with this Slido technology we use, people submit questions. That gives us a chance to see what everybody's thinking, right? To hear from everybody in some reasonably civilized, non-Twitter-like manner. And everybody gets a chance to vote the questions up, And so, and then Tammy selects the questions, and she tries to select questions that might enable me to explore a wide variety of topics, but also simultaneously taking into account the vote and the particularities of the question. And so that's quite fun. So then we'll do that next, and thank you very much. Tam?
Question number 1. What's Joe Rogan like?
Joe's great. I've been in rooms with Joe with some relatively formidable people. I was at dinner with him at one point, probably 4 years ago, with what do we call those characters? The International Dark Web?
Yeah.
Is that it? Eric Weinstein's term? He really nailed that. we're going to put out the IDW drinking song. This is funny. I got to tell you this story. It's so funny. I've been working with this university down in Georgia, in Savannah, called Ralston, and it's a bricks and mortar institution, and we have some fun with it. And we were thinking about a motto. You know, you have a little shield, and then you have a Latin motto. And I asked the president of the university, Stephen Blackwood, what our motto. We started talking about what our motto might be, and I said, well, what's the Latin for "up yours, woke moralists"? So he thought that was pretty funny, and it is pretty funny. I think that would be hilarious, actually, to have that in Latin. And then he said, well, that'd be a good motto. Maybe we need a drinking song. And I thought, well, that's a funny idea. So I don't know, a song popped into my mind. It's Liddy the Pink. It's a famous song from the 1960s. It's an old folk song. We'll drink and drink and drink too. Lydia Pink, the pink, da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da-da. You get the idea. And I rewrote that as a parody of postmodern philosophy because that seemed to be the thing to do. And then we got a bunch of people to sing it. So Ben Shapiro sings some of it playing the violin, which is very, very funny. And Dave Rubin and this crazy bastard from Concordia University in Canada, Gad Saad, who's an evolutionary biologist who regularly dresses in a purple wig and flagellates himself for committing social justice crimes. And so, and Janice Fiamengo, who Tammy's talked to, who was a feminist at one point, a women's studies professor who had an epiphany 20 years ago and realized that everything she was teaching was toxic to the hilt, and has become maybe the world's most effective, deep academic critic of feminist thought. And who else do we have in there? Douglas Murray. A whole host of, the usual suspects. And we've made some puppets. One of them, I'm so embarrassed to even tell you this, but it's so funny. There's a woman named Andrea Dworkin, and she's like, if you stacked up toxic femininity and you put someone at the pinnacle, it would be Andrea Dworkin. And she was a hooker for like 10 years. And I'm dead serious. I'm not making this up. I'm not making this up. And a busy one. And she didn't like men, and no wonder, no wonder. And Dworkin's most famous line is, "All sex is rape." And she's quite influential in radical feminist circles, and we made a puppet with her. And it's nude from the waist up, and she has pasties and swings around a stripper's pole. So, yeah, we have Foucault. We have a Foucault puppet too, and I don't like Foucault very much, even though he was brilliant, Michel Foucault. And some of the things he said were he was onto something, but he's a demented person, intellectually and personally. Very bad actor in the deepest of all possible senses. And we have a Foucault puppet too, and we have him surrounded by children that he's inviting into the back of a van with the promise of candies. So, yeah, so that's all going to come out in the next, we're hoping 2 months, so stay on board for that, man. So, and of course, I've completely forgotten what the question was.
Joe Rogan.
Oh, Rogan.
That's what Joe Rogan means to
Oh, yeah. Rogan. Okay. Okay, so I was in this restaurant with these IDW guys, the ones that are singing this song. And Shapiro was there, Ben Shapiro, and Dave Rubin, and Eric Weinstein, and who else was there? It doesn't matter. You get the picture, and most of you know who Shapiro is, and I don't know what you think of Ben Shapiro, but he is so damn smart that it's just beyond belief, That man, I've been on a plane with him, and I can talk quite a lot, in case any of you haven't noticed, but Shapiro, he's he's just a machine gun. And I think he probably thinks 5 times faster than anyone you've ever met. And you know how fast he talks? He's thinking way faster than that. The words can barely he can barely keep up with himself. And Eric Weinstein's no slouch either. But still, you know, I've never been in a room and thought that, without harboring the suspicion that Joe Rogan was the smartest person in the room. So, you know, and he plays lunkhead to some degree, and he's a tough guy, and he's got a working class background, and he's banged around, and he's a fighter and a commentator and a comedian, and he's an ordinary guy in the best sense, you know. But man, he's one smart character. He didn't get to where he was by accident. He's been successful in like 4 different domains, right? He has a successful career as a comedian, and he's pretty damn funny. His piece on the Kardashians enticing Jenner into becoming trans it's one of the funniest things I've ever seen. You got to check that out on Netflix. I just couldn't. He acts out the devil perched on Jenner's poster bed, screeching to him about becoming female in a Kardashian voice. It's just, it's inspired in the best possible way. And you know, Rogan was a fight commentator, and then he started this podcast, and it's just the barest bones podcast you can imagine. It's still like that. He's got a nice studio in Austin. It's quite cool. And it's just him and his producer. That's it. And Joe picks all the guests. And why? Because he wants to talk to them. That's the only reason. Because Joe doesn't need to do this, right? There isn't another driving motivation. He invites people he wants to talk to, and then he asks them all the questions he can think up. And what's fun about Joe, and what makes him unlike the run-of-the-mill, especially legacy journalists, is he's actually asking you questions. The reason Joe's asking questions, this is so strange, is because he wants the answers. So imagine that. Instead of just laying a trap for whoever he's talking to so that they can do themselves in, so that can redound to his benefit, which is what the narcissistic legacy media journalists do. Now, not all legacy media journalists are narcissistic, by the way, but plenty of them are. And the whole enterprise rewards that to some degree. Whereas Joe, he just asks stupid questions. And why, when I say stupid, I mean, well, you wouldn't ask a question if you weren't stupid, because you'd know the answer. But if you're really wise, then you know you're stupid, and so you'll ask the questions, and then once you get the answer, you're not stupid anymore. And he's been doing that. I mean, how many people has Joe interviewed now? Like 3,000? So imagine now, this is his university. He's had 3,000 of the sharpest people in the world answer every single question he had 4 times a week, 3,000 times. And so, Joe's great. He's straight. He's never played a trick on me. He's never asked me a treacherous question. Like, he's no pushover, you know. He's a tough guy. And he's got his opinions, although he doesn't really take them all that seriously, partly because he's a comedian. And what are you going to have? A comedian that takes himself seriously? That's like a woke comedian. And the thing about woke comedians, I don't know if you've noticed this, but they're not funny. And so that means they're actually not comedians. I don't know what the hell they are. Puppets of Satan, I think. But they're not comedians, that's for sure. And Joe's damn funny. And so that's also delightful, because it's having a conversation with him it's a high form of play, you know. And especially the last conversation I had with him, which was the best one we had, and partly because I'm feeling much better than I've been feeling for like 7 years. I mean, the time just flew by. you know. 3 hours later, you're just like done, because 3 hours of intense conversation, that's quite a lot. And so you need a day to recover from going to talk to Joe. But then, you know, the fact that time flies when you're having fun is also why his podcast is so popular, you know. It's like Joe asks the questions he has to ask, and it turns out that those are the questions other people would ask, by and large. And then he's taking everybody along for the ride instead of feeding them pre-digested pablum, you know, the result of his opinions. He's conducting the exploration with them, which is what I'm hoping, by the way, that we're doing while we're here tonight, because none of this is pre-packaged. You know, I mean, I have my corpus of stories that I draw on, but I don't have a goal coming out here except to get farther in my explorations than I have already, and then to see if, while I'm getting farther, I can simultaneously make that comprehensible to each of you. Not to all of you, but to each of you. That's different, you know. There's no crowd here as far as I'm concerned. There's just people. There's one person. There's 5,000 individual people here. And so it's a good thing to know if you're public speaking, you know. If you're talking to the crowd, you're talking to the wrong organism. You just talk to a person. I always pick a person and talk to them, you know, because that works, and then you can do it. And I really like Joe. I admire him tremendously. What he's done is impossible. You know, he's the number one podcast in 96 countries. No one's ever done that in the history of the world. He's the most powerful media person who's ever lived. And he wears it lightly, you know, and that's really something. So, 2 thumbs up for Joe Rogan as far as I'm concerned. The other thing I could tell you is, you know, I've met people, political people too, who, when they're on stage, they're one person, and when they're talking to you, they're another. And sometimes it's because their on-stage performance is a performance, you know. See this, people have a political act. And I don't, look, no political act is pretty damn dull. Like if you just can't pull it off, well, that doesn't make you moral. But it's a lot better just to come out and say what you have to say and let the cards fall where they're going to. And you might not agree with someone like that, but you can trust them because what you see is what you get, you know. And that's Joe. What you see is what you get. When you talk to him at the restaurant afterwards or before the show, you can't even tell when the show starts, really, because you're just talking to Rogan and the way the cameras go, and it's just a genuine conversation. And isn't it so amazing that that's made him the number one podcast in the world, is that's what people want, is just a genuine, ignorant conversation. And that's 3 hours long. It's so preposterous and so remarkable. So yeah, Joe's great. All right, Tim.
Now I just put eye drops in just a sec.
Okay.
Now you stop.
Yeah. Haha, gotcha.
Anyway, here you go.
Okay.
I have it here just a
Yep.
sec. All right. Imagining. You're the active agent in imagining. In dreaming, the unconscious imagines autonomously. Autonomously, that's the word. Autonomously, oh yeah, that's how they spelled it. What's the relationship between the unconscious and the imagination?
That's a very good question.
That was a good question.
The dream is how the implicit structure of your perception and value hierarchy reveals itself to you. Now, I'll have to unpack that, but so the dream, the implicit structure that guides your attentional focus and constitutes the structure of your value hierarchy reveals itself to you in the dream. So let's unpack that. It took me really like 40 years to figure this out, so it's hard to unpack. It's very hard to unpack. What the hell are you up to? And the answer is, you don't know. Why? Because you're really, really complicated. And yet you can see the world, which is a very difficult thing to do because there are a lot of ways to see the world. There's an infinite number of ways to see the world. And the fact that you can see it one particular way is nothing short of a miracle, and you certainly don't know how you do it. As far as you're concerned, you just look at the world and there it is. And there's a lot going on to make that happen. I mean, half your brain is devoted specifically to visual processing, and the other half is integrally involved. So for example, when you do something like look at a bottle, you think, you see bottle, you think bottle, you evaluate bottle, you pick up bottle. That's the order of perception to action. Sensation, perception, emotion, action. Or sensation, perception, emotion, thought, action. That's how we think. That's just not true at all. When you see a bottle, the motor grip you would use to pick it up is automatically primed by the perception. So even your motor cortex that governs your actions participates in the shaping of your perception. Almost everything you see in the world is a usable object or a pathway or an obstacle. You don't see things, because there's an infinite number of things. You don't see things and then overlay a value structure on that. The value structure is implicit in the perceptions. The value structure is implicit in the perceptions. And then the people who've made much of implicit bias sort of know that, although they're not smart enough to think through what they accidentally discovered. And so that's a big problem in our society at the moment, because you can be accused, for example, of unconsciously viewing the world through an oppressive, racist hierarchy of presumptions. And there's a bit of truth to that, because you're probably a little more racist and sexist and I don't know. How many flaws don't you have? Like 0. You've got all the flaws to some degree. And so, we're all of us are ethnocentric. All of us prefer our kin, even though we might not like even them. And, you've had Christmas with your family. And who's most likely to murder you? In case you want to know. A drunk relative. Particularly if you're drunk, so remember that next Christmas. So, we see the world through an a priori structure of value. And we don't know what that is. And we dream it. We dream about it. And then we aggregate those dreams into stories. That's what a novelist does. A novelist uses imagination. Let's say no novelist worth his salt knows what the hell's going to happen when he starts writing the book. How dull would that be? The writers keep writing because they want to know what happens next. And if they really want to know, so will you when you read it. And they're using their imagination, or it's using them. That's a perfectly reasonable way of thinking about it. That's what would you call it? Divine